suppose that you expect me to believe in sorcery as well.
Of course.
Why?
Because it's real.
How can I know that, Mr. Shen?
See? That was nothing. But that's how it always begins. Very small.
Is that how these impressive structures that we've explored across the land really began? As some very small structure? Indeed, all these very small blocks had to be carved, weren't they? Or were they formed with some advanced process of alchemy that's beyond our current understanding? This is one of the theories that we've worked with in our explorations, and here in Lexington, Kentucky, we see that there are elaborate constructions that seem to defy the logistical and construction limitations at the time. But what's the real explanation? How do we explain these processes, and what were these sciences, these occult sciences as we call them now? And what exactly is the occult? Join me as we explore these interesting questions, seeking answers for the how behind all these incredible and impressive structures that we've looked at. Join me as we explore the occult sciences and the old world. What do we define as the occult sciences? Alchemy, astrology, magic. What exactly are occult sciences? We tend to define occult sciences as that doesn't fall under the current institutionalized recognition of our sciences or any of our other recognized studies. And yet, oddly enough, occult science includes many different fields, and we're going to explore those fields in this particular exploration. Is it possible that really what these occult sciences are the remnants of the original old world technology, or at least the knowledge of it? The old world technology that was utilized to construct these impressive structures that still dwell across the land, defying explanation with their longevity and the enduring nature of their construction. Of course, mainstream sources will tell us that they simply had better efforts that were put into their construction, that everyone was a craftsman, and there's really no explanation given for the logistical feats of the past. Just assume that they did it, because obviously somebody did it, and we're not denying that. But what exactly is the origin behind these occult sciences? We think of things that are mysterious, that defy explanation. And whether we're talking about magic, alchemy, astrology, or even yoga, which, believe it or not, is considered an occult science, we're actually looking for what the explanations are for how we managed to build this civilization in the past. Are we to take the mainstream account seriously that in the 1800s with just horse and buggy and various people possessing incredible knowledge, whether it was construction knowledge or craftsmanship knowledge, and of course nothing ever mentioned about logistical knowledge, that they managed to construct these impressive edifices that still stand to this day? Or did they have some sort of more advanced knowledge that still survives today in what we call the occult sciences? And why is this labeled as the occult sciences? Interestingly enough, when we look at the mainstream perception of the occult sciences, it varies. It's all over the spectrum in terms of seriousness. Some of these things are not taken very serious at all, and yet others have an element of seriousness to them, such as examining the historical account of the very polarizing figure Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was active in the early 20th century and the late 19th century, or the late 1800s, early 1900s. A very questionable time to be sure, and you can certainly research Mr. Crowley's biography on your own. There have been many others who have retained knowledge of occult sciences, although how accurate are they? Why is there such a reference to the very unique and intricate symbolism within the occult sciences? Do they have meaning? Are there direct connections to the old world? Now, there's many different interpretations of what the occult really is, and the occult sciences. But one thing I encourage you to do is certainly research on your own and come to your own conclusions, because, as always, this is a very conflicting account. Indeed, looking into the background of Aleister Crowley, some people say that he's one of the most evil individuals in the land in the early 1900s. Of course, he would subsequently be surpassed by the era of the dictators, as we call them. But what was really the truth behind Aleister Crowley? Was he merely just some elaborate, extravagant individual who dressed up in unique garb and paid tribute to certain long-lost religions or belief systems that we no longer have knowledge of? Or did he actually have access to knowledge that was lost? What about Madame Blavatsky and her understanding of creating her own religion? What's really the origin behind these individuals, and why were there so many people like this in the 1800s? Well, we can certainly say there were plenty of people like this in the 1900s too, such as Elizabeth Clare Prophet, but why is there something almost more enduring about their presence in the 1800s and the early 1900s? Indeed, you can find what tends to reflect the membership of some sort of occult science is it involves dressing up in some elaborate form of garb or raiment. But what's it really mean? Is there symbolism behind it, or is it an actual reflection of what occurred in the past? And what are the meanings behind these accessories? Do they actually have a use and an application? Or is it all just for ceremony? It's hard to say. It is informed to us that Crowley had studied many individuals that came before him, many of his predecessors with rather interesting looks and interesting personal habits. Of course, that's going off the mainstream official historical account, and to what extent that we could actually trust that. Maybe it is 100% accurate. Crowley had a very interesting life, even trying to scale great mountains in failed expeditions, where the members of the expedition apparently even tried to replace him as leader of the expedition. Make of these accounts what you will, but why is it during this time frame in this so-called age of exploration or age of discovery and heroes, people are always trying to go to elaborate places? And what to make of Crowley himself? We have accounts that he may have even played a role in setting up World War I by encouraging the German attack on the Lusitania. Is that really what happened? Is foreign policy really that easy to shape that a person who's undercover could very easily suggest something that a nation would act on? Well, if that's indeed the case, then why do we even have wars at all? Going beyond the potential events of Aleister Crowley, whose life is quite questionable in and of itself, we look at some of the deeper meanings, though, behind the studies of the occult. It's mysterious, it's alluring, but is it really serious, or is it something that's supposed to be taken with a grain of salt? Or are we to treat it in a manner that is not very serious? And I certainly don't want to disrespect anyone's beliefs, because I'm all about respecting all beliefs, even if they're not necessarily the beliefs that I was initially ingrained with. Because it really doesn't matter. Maybe all of these beliefs have application to them, that there are serious elements, especially within the occult. It could be possible that an individual such as Aleister Crowley really did have connections, and really did have some sort of esoteric knowledge, and that the reason that we're informed that he was evil and bent is because perhaps there was another meaning behind what he was doing. Or maybe he was resisting the authorities of the day. Truth of the matter is, do your own studies on his biography and come to your own conclusions. And maybe there is reality to the fact that he was perhaps a very evil and twisted man. Or maybe he really was just simply an intelligence agent. Who knows for sure? We do know, though, that there are a lot of connections, and there were a lot of other groups that he was affiliated with, such as the odd Oriental Templar Order. Yes, apparently some sort of Germanic order that had other connections and other esoteric connections. And that's the odd thing about this. Looking behind all these potential memberships and all these organizations that existed and overlapped in the 1800s. And you may recall that we've looked at all these rather unique groups in the past. This symbolism that traces its origin all the way back to ancient Egypt, apparently. Or is it ancient Egypt, or is it some other connection? What's really the meaning behind the Golden Dawn, and what is the actual Tree of Life? There's several different interpretations of it, and you can certainly look at the reference material itself and come to your own conclusions. But I have to ask the question, is there an entirely different meaning behind this unique and esoteric knowledge? Crowley never actually met Nikola Tesla, although that's quite surprising given the fact that Tesla seems to be connected with everything and anything that came into being in the early 1900s, whether it was technology or various applications of technology. But officially they never met. But oddly enough, there are many strange connections. And is there a connection with the esoteric loss of martial arts knowledge? We think of the story of Frank Dukes, the individual who's responsible for writing the story of Bloodsport, and of course the actual reality of the events that he relayed. And he dressed up in fancy costumes too, so perhaps he had some sort of esoteric knowledge. But there is actual scientific application to martial arts. There's no questioning that. And the fact that force equals mass times velocity squared. It's a simple formula. If you can strike faster, you can apply more force. And of course, if you have more mass, you can apply more force. But what's all this getting at? It's looking at what may well be lost actual scientific knowledge. Take the example of astrology, the study of the celestial objects and their position in the sky. Now, of course, the official study of astrology is stated to have preceded the current and scientific accepted study of astronomy. And of course, our favorite channel scientific contributor, Carl Sagan, states that astrology is simply a silly study that's very easily derided and denied. And he goes out of his way in the Cosmos series to make sure that he tells us exactly what he thinks of astrology. And we have to appreciate the fact that he's very honest about it. But is there something more behind the study of astrology and the symbolism behind it? The various signs, do they have a different meaning? Perhaps there's no actual alignment with any sort of celestial objects. Maybe they're merely signs that provide a different sort of calendar, a different sort of understanding of a sequence of events that may be beyond us. Perhaps it's another way of tracking a long count calendar, and indeed, there are different cultures and civilizations that do employ astrology in that manner. And as I'm fond of saying, you simply have to come to your own conclusions. Because some people will tell you that this is merely pseudoscience, that it's very easily dismissed, that there's nothing behind astrology aside from a means of occupying your time. Are you a Virgo? Are you a Sagittarius? Are you a Pisces? What are the differences? When you were born, does it have an effect on who you are and what your fate is going to be? Or is there something else behind it entirely? Let us suppose that the actual study of astrology really had a much more serious component to it, that the symbols and the outcomes that were associated with them and the arrangement of these symbols had a completely different meaning. Indeed, perhaps it reflected a much more accurate calendar than we can begin to imagine. A calendar that was truly accurate and did really keep track of time. And not only time, but it also operates in cycles. Because we have to consider the fact that our actual civilization, our society, and our reality that we're in does operate in some sort of cycles. There's also the presence of astrology symbols in many of the structures that we've looked at. Why so many astrology symbols in all of these structures? And many of these structures were constructed, of course, in that questionable time frame between 1880 and 1930, when we seem to be able to pull off amazing things. So why, again, do we see this reference to astrology? Was there some sort of meaning? Did this actually have a much more powerful place in our civilization in the past? Well, if you go off the mainstream account, it just apparently looked like it was a cool thing to decorate structures with in that questionable period from the late 1800s to the 1930s. Even in locations undisclosed, we see the great zodiac that shows us the symbols of astrology. So why do you see it everywhere? Well, perhaps it's just similar to that explanation for why when you just look at random buildings in random places, whether it's in New York City or, dare I even say, Lexington, Kentucky, where you'll just happen to see griffins all over the place. And the zodiac is much like the griffin. It's just coming up everywhere. But what does it really mean? If these structures really were constructed by a previous civilization, then apparently the zodiac had a very paramount importance, much in the same way that the griffin did. But why does it also come up in things such as the Prague clock? It again gives the impression that there was a very paramount significance behind it, that someone was really trying to establish counts and cycles. Were they preparing for some impending disaster? Or did they simply understand that there was going to be a new age, if you will? People often talk about the difference between the age of Aquarius and the age of Pisces and how we've transitioned these ages and how things are no longer emotionally based. And we need to approach things with a more stoic outlook, albeit pessimistic either way, apparently, according to some. But whatever your outlook on life, consider the fact that all of these structures that we've looked at have no shortage of the symbols that do reflect the astrological symbols that we've studied. And it seems to indicate that it was a very paramount and important study in the past. Was it really what their entire civilization was based on? Or did it provide them unique opportunities if they understood the cycles? Were they aware of the fact that there were changing ages? Did they understand the difference between the eras? Or were they simply as directionless as we are about it, operating on a calendar that's not entirely accurate? And maybe it's just all a great coincidence. For whatever reason, though, you have to understand, and I ask you to pay attention when you're doing your own explorations or just simply anywhere out and about. How many references do you see to astrological symbols? And what do they really mean? Do they mean what they tell us they mean? Or do they have a greater significance behind them? Do they reflect perhaps an opportunity as one transitions cycles, eras or ages or whatever you want to call great periods of time? And oddly enough, we have to try to decipher these symbols. What makes us more challenging, though, is it's clear that in our current civilization, we do assign different meanings to symbols. And what about the art of divination or magic, the ability to conjure things? Now, of course, this is where the occult sciences starts to cross the line from what people would consider serious science to something that they might not even consider pseudoscience, but simply the realm of one's imagination or fantasy. It may be true, but there are many people who practice and have knowledge of divination or magic, the ability to conjure things from knowledge of certain spells, incantations, or other esoteric or insider knowledge that is lost to our current civilization. Was it possible that in the past this was really not just simply magic, but actually a form of more advanced technology? An ability to actually form things using applications of this technology. Imagine if to us it appears as magic, but in reality it is an actual certified technology, the knowledge of which has simply been lost over time. And now to ensure that others do not use this technology that could, how shall we say, threaten the current status quo, that it's merely taken in a non-serious manner, and it's even ridiculed by members of the mainstream. Now, I don't recall Carl Sagan going out of his way to ridicule divination in Cosmos, but he did seem to make a few references to it. I'm going to watch the series and come to your own conclusions. But there are many different references from different cultures, different times, different societies that divination and magic and the presence of it really did have a practical application. And if it was all just in the minds of individuals, then why does this endure to this day? Well, the answer will be because people are gullible and they simply want to believe certain things. Yet we're supposed to believe that these, again, same people in the past who were so gullible were able to build these very impressive structures according to the mainstream account? And maybe they did. Maybe they really did figure it out. Or perhaps there's a much more elaborate explanation behind it. We're often told that Occam's razor, the simplest explanation, tends to be the most correct explanation. However, much like they say with every sword, there's two blades that cut both ways. Oftentimes, seeking the simplest explanation will have you overlook what may be the accurate explanation. And that happens just as often as the simplest explanation being the outcome. In the end, I don't know what the past really contained. I don't know if we once had the ability to practice alchemy, divination, or astrology. But if we did, and if they all worked together as more advanced sciences, could it provide an explanation for how the great structures that we've explored, whether it's a courthouse in Lexington, Kentucky, a state capitol in Iowa, an impressive cathedral anywhere in the Czech Republic, is it possible that the real construction knowledge of this came from what today we consider the occult sciences? And just imagine what the possibilities would be if this is the actual explanation. If this is how we explain all these logistical conundrums that we have when we consider the questions on how these structures were really completed. If there was the ability to conjure or perhaps create some sort of advanced polymer or even a construction material that's beyond our ability to categorize and describe, perhaps it was through the process of alchemy, magic, divination, at least what we would call those terms, that this construction material was actually innovated. And perhaps there were other means for transporting it. And it doesn't matter whether you look at the legacy of Asia, Europe, South America, North America, or anywhere else in the land, you will find numerous accounts to this actually being an applied science in the past. Now, of course, we're simply informed that it was merely myth, it is legend, there is no real divination. And yet people actually practice it. And the reference of Egshan from the film Big Trouble in Little China shows that there were people who practiced and believed in it. Well, it's just a movie, it's not real. Of course. Of course you can say that about anything and everything. Going back to the 1800s in that questionable Victorian time frame, they even consider the study of what we officially call ghosts as part of the occult sciences. Now we have to ask this question. Is this a legitimate study of the occult sciences? Or is this just something that's categorized with them in order to potentially discredit the actual occult sciences? It is stated that projection technology was available during the Victorian time frame, and it was utilized in theatrical performances to provide the imaging of specters on the stage. Now, is that what really happened, or was there a more advanced application to it? Or is it possible that they really had the ability to capture something from a different realm or a different reality? There are many different explanations. The mainstream official historical explanation, of course, is yes, they innovated projection technology and thus began with the theatricality and, I don't want to say deception, but perhaps presentation, all in the form of entertainment. There's no shortage, though, of photos that are available from the 1800s that give us the impression that there was some sort of connection with the spiritual realm. Once again, the easy response to this is that these were merely altered photos. And indeed, since photography was a relatively new medium at the time, then you had the ability to alter photos and therefore make it appear as though there was some sort of spirit that was actually present in these photos. Now, I was not present when these photos were taken, and I certainly was not present when these photos were developed. So whether they were altered or not, I cannot say for sure. You can certainly come to your own conclusions, and it may well be that they were altered, every single one of them. Or is there a different explanation behind it? Is it possible that there was a completely different type of technology that was still available? Whether we consider it spiritual mediums or some other form of speaking and interfacing with different realms. It certainly opens up the possibility for many different forms of existence. And perhaps in this current civilization, people just simply want to deny or deprive themselves of considering the possibility. Because we've explained everything. We know the answers to everything. At least that's what we'll be informed that mainstream science provides for us. And if we don't know the answers yet, well, we're very close to discovering them. And once again, I do admit that may be true. But if that's true, then why do we have so many enduring mysteries? And why is it people have to struggle and commit to cheetah flips and intellectual leaps of logic to try to explain all these mysteries that we've had? Why is it so wrong to have something that's mysterious? Isn't that the very basis of exploration? Is it possible that some of these specters in these images may have something more real behind them? And what's wrong with even considering that possibility? Well, you have to be ridiculed. There's no such thing as ghosts, and that may indeed be true. But is it possible that there could be other life forms that operate on a completely different dimensional plane than the dimensional plane that we operate on? And could this be a legitimate explanation for these specters that we see and we classify as ghosts? This all may be possible. There's other images of rather unique technological developments that came from the Victorian era. And someone who told me in the comments on one of our explorations last week, in terms of how we would explain the presence of, say, something as a radiator, and yet nobody really knows how a radiator works. I mean, we have an understanding of it. Or even an older form of copying technology, such as the ditto machine. We lose knowledge very quickly, and it's a very good point. Because, of course, the technology is obsolete, so who's going to practice it anymore? And maybe that's the explanation. But it's also another reference for why and how we have so many explanations of not understanding what the reality behind things are. When you look at this particular image, you can see that there may be something much more to it. Is it possible that this is just a natural rock formation on this land? Or is there something more to it? What about the bridge? What about all these images where we have these spectral figures? Again, they could just all be altered photographs, every single one of them. But let's suppose that they are all altered photographs. Then we have a much more disturbing question. If photographs from the 1800s could be very easily altered and were, especially in this quantity, then how many of the total photographs that we have that we rely on to give us our mainstream historical evidence may have been altered? The truth of the matter is we don't know. We have no way of knowing. Now, people will say that it's merely a presumption on our part. But what's the truth and what's the reality? It's ultimately up to you. There's also the continued mystery of objects in the sky, or what we call UFOs, and now the more recent term UAPs, unidentified flying objects, and now unidentified aerial phenomenon. When did it really start? Or would you be surprised to know that there were a slew of unidentified flying objects, or mystery airships as they call them, from the 1890s to, again, the early 1900s. And this is also considered part of the occult sciences, ufology, although oddly enough the study of UFOs tends to go back and forth whether it's taken seriously. Indeed, there have been several official military studies trying to document these unidentified flying objects, such as Project Blue Book, or unidentified aerial phenomenon, and yet the conclusion is always the same. There's never really anything actually going on. There may be a few objects that we do decide we can't determine the identity of. And it may well be that these are just, again, simply doctored or changed images once again. Or images that are images of something else entirely. Maybe they're just simply some sort of strange ability to develop the photo and make it appear as though there's something in it that's not really there. Again, some sort of lost ability. But oddly enough, there are numerous newspaper articles that we refer to from the 1890s that do indicate there seemed to be some sort of strange technology available with these mystery airships. And indeed, there are actual photos that are certified as official that show airships flying all over the place in the very early 1900s and even the late 1890s. So what to make of it? It's very hard to say. Because as we've stated before, there are no first-hand accounts that we can gain from 1899. Indeed, one of the oldest people in the world recently passed away. And they were around in 1908, but they didn't have conscious memory in 1908. So again, as we try to look at the past and corroborate what actually happened, the availability of first-hand accounts decreases with the passage of time. But you don't need to worry yourself about that because we have historians, we have scholars, we have scientists, and they will study things with the passage of time, and they will come to conclusions that will be transmitted to us, and these are the official conclusions that we will abide by. And you certainly have the discretion to do that and accept these conclusions. But it shouldn't be wrong to ask questions about them. It shouldn't be wrong to be able to explore and consider alternative possibilities. Why is it so important to dictate exactly what people think? If I'm just thinking something, it's certainly no danger to anybody else, is it? What's really the story behind these strange aerial objects? Is it all really just mass pandemonium? Merely the elaborate fabrications of people who are derided as conspiracy theorists? Is it merely strange clouds in the sky, Venus, or odd aerial phenomenon that we just don't understand? Or could it be something else entirely? Signs of some sort of overlapping of realities, or even possibly the remains of portals? We'll be informed by the mainstream that the study of UFOs should be undertaken, but it should be undertaken by official government agencies, and it should of course remove all conspiracy theorists. Or in other words, it should remove the conclusions of anybody thinking for themselves, because that's not something we encourage, and we should trust the official accounts. Whatever you make of the entire study of UFOs, and I'm always fascinated how I've never really mentioned UFOs in any official exploration, but yet for some reason people always just bring them up in the comments, which is quite fascinating to me. I guess we just try to attribute everything to the occult sciences. Which is fascinating because it goes down to that whole concept of what's being taken seriously and what's simply to be taken with total absurdity. Why are we mixing the serious with the absurd? It's almost as though someone seems to be intentionally trying to cloud the picture of what really happened. Or in other words, you always have the ability to say that this isn't serious, We didn't actually have this technology with these balloons, these blimps, these rigid airships in the past. Well, we did, but it was very controlled. My best friend's brother's sister's boyfriend's cousin's girlfriend saw a blimp and could tell you exactly what its capabilities were. And that may be true. If I had 10 cents for every time somebody commented on that. The point being is that first-hand accounts are very limited. And you might be surprised to know that this technology we've had for quite some time. Whether it's a blimp, an airship, or even the drone. Yes, we've had drone technology since the end of World War I. But you talk to some people and they would think it's a recent technological innovation from the 2000s. Perhaps there was a different change in application, but the technology was always there. So back to the original question, what are we actually seeing in the sky? Is there anything going on, or is it just simply misinformation? Something that's encouraged to keep us looking at certain things, or perhaps to provide a potential explanation for something that's really going on, but yet has no legitimate explanation for it. As always, I'll let you come to your own conclusions, and by all means, let me know what you think in the comments about all this, such as UFOs. But we look at some of these other images, though, and I remember when I first saw them, and I always thought it was interesting how these almost look like models. These look like plates. Are they? Some of the images do. Some of the images may have more veracity to them. But again, it's just a picture. Unless you're actually there witnessing the event when it happened, you don't really have any way to know exactly what really happened. There's something to be said for having a first-hand account of something and witnessing yourself and seeing it with your own eyes. It truly gives a degree of realism. What was the story of saucers over Washington, D.C., and where did saucers come from? Well, we go back to pre-World War II times with the film Things to Come, which was overseen, produced, and written by H.G. Wells. Ah yes, H.G. Wells, the individual who wrote War of the Worlds, who developed a very interesting sense of world affairs, especially in the 1930s. H.G. Wells was quite despondent with the film Metropolis, and he felt that Things to Come was a response to this. And here we have protagonist John Cabal, and no, I'm not making this up, in his really cool black uniform with his really nice black boots, standing over the pacified population of Everytown, after his organization Wings Over the World has bombed it with the gas of peace. Fortunately, the gas of peace didn't kill anybody. Well, actually, it did kill the chief, who was the warlord who was in charge of Everytown. And John Cabal states that Wings Over the World has a problem with sovereign nations. They do not accept sovereign nations. And you might notice that a lot of the old world architecture is shown being destroyed in these images. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. And unfortunately for the chief, because he had a condition the gas of peace didn't render him unconscious, it killed him. But it was fortuitous in the plot that it didn't kill anyone else who was innocent and had some sort of condition that would have rendered them vulnerable to the gas of peace, causing death. Yes, a very, very odd protagonist with a very strange name and a very odd organization, Wings Over the World, but that was the story. And Jack Palance even gave a turn in the Shape of Things to Come that was released in Canada in the late 1970s. I will say he looks slightly more dignified in his particular helmet than the John Cabal of the 1930s version did, but that's just my opinion. Make of it what you will. What's all this have to do with the occult sciences, though? Well, we see that there's always this intention to induce some sort of form of absurdity in it. And even the study of Bigfoot and cryptids is actually considered an occult science. Yes, very, very odd. What's the reality behind Bigfoot? Because that's considered an occult science. Is it an actual study of a possible cryptid? Is cryptozoology, or animals that we haven't identified or cataloged yet, possible? Or is it merely just something designed to divert our attention? Well, there's evidence that indicates both ways, and evidence that seems to be legitimate first-hand accounts of people who have encountered creatures such as these that we can't explain. And then, of course, there's the fact that science says we've never actually captured one of these creatures alive, and there's no evidence of this happening to show that we have definitive conclusions. Although really we could say the same thing about any of the other occult sciences. And so, what's really the story behind Bigfoot? I honestly don't know. It may well be that it's a legitimate cryptid. It may be that it's some sort of life form that again exists between realities that can only be encountered in certain areas. Or it may really simply be the product of our imagination. I'm not taking that off the table, and at no point in time do I. I leave it to you to decide. But it is interesting how the legacy of this mystery continues, how it continues to endure, much as the UFO mystery and these other mysteries. Of course, there are no mysteries. But yet the mainstream then wants to say, yes, we need to study these mysteries, but without the interference of conspiracy theorists. So it's as though they want to have it both ways. Last but not least, would you believe that yoga is actually considered an occult science? Yes, yoga, something you should go down and do at your local YMCA if you're in the United States, or any fitness club, and something that you can achieve a certification for. Isn't that interesting? Yes, you can be certified for yoga, an occult science, and you can teach your own yoga class. I'd like you to stay with me as we examine the concept of the occult sciences and look more closely at alchemy, and even the accounts of the homunculus, or the many pronunciations for it. There's many interesting elements to occult sciences that could explain these incredible old world structures we've looked at. Exploration, we are going to be exploring the concept of the strange land, or voyages to strange lands. Now, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about something that's real? Are we talking about something that's imagined? Well, it could be both. It could be neither. And not to be ambiguous about the final answer, but really we're going to take a look at a couple different concepts. Some which may just be in the minds of fantasy authors, and some which may be quite disturbingly real. So in any event, whether we're talking about going to another planet, or we're talking about going to the ice wall and beyond, I want you to keep your minds open, because we're going to be examining all concepts, as we tend to do on this channel. And I'm not one who likes to negate anything or not consider all possibilities, because I feel that we have the possibility to look at different viewpoints, and there might be truth hidden across those viewpoints. And as always, I don't want to tell you what to think. I personally believe that having the openness to think and decide for yourself is one of the most important things that we have as individuals, especially with everyone trying to tell us what to think. And I mean everyone. So going on past this interesting image that I dug up, this old science fiction image from the 1970s, and I'm sure no one's going to declare this as an image that's generated by artificial intelligence, but you never know. You might remember that image we had of 1970s special effects from the 1970s film Zardoz that somebody out there said, I think that's an AI image. Yes, apparently so. 1970s special effects. But anyway, this concept of lands that are somewhere out there, whether you want to think of it as another planet, or we're all on a gigantic sphere, or are we on a gigantic plane or a planet, it doesn't really matter. We're going to examine some of these strange lands and where they may be and what they may consist of. Now, I thought I'd start by going and looking at what our latest science concept says about the possibility of quote unquote interstellar travel. I used to be interested in this a long time ago. I still maintain a passing interest in it, but what they're telling us now is that there's this concept called laser sails. The science, I love that, behind using laser sails to reach incredible speeds. So another concept that we have, now granted we do not have a practical application yet, but at least it shows you that the great scientists out there are still thinking of ways that perhaps we could travel to a nearby star system. It won't take tens of thousands of years to reach Alpha Centauri. It'll only take a couple years thanks to this concept. I mean, there's not a practical application, but it is an interesting concept. Just thought I'd share that with you. And just so you know, oh yes, here's another very interesting artistic rendition of it. Yes, this seems to be the way they're going now. Our chief engineer is deploying a makeshift solar sail. We have high hopes that if successful, this will generate power to keep us alive. It'll also take it Alpha Centauri, apparently, but this is the current concept. I just thought I'd review, though, back in the 1960s, there was another prospect of utilizing what was called a nuclear detonation pusher plate, or Project Orion. The concept from the 1960s was that a spacecraft would utilize a pusher plate, and they would detonate a nuclear device behind it, and therefore ride the increasing speed to get up to, about half the speed of light. At least that's what the concept said. And as a result of that, they could reach a nearby star system. Now, why are we talking about this? Because this concept was from the 1960s. And here we are, it's 2025, and our concept has evolved, but our practical application hasn't. Now, am I saying that's proof of anything? Proof of some kind of conspiracy? Absolutely not. I'm simply saying that 6 decades have gone by, and it seems like we're only in the concept phase. Apparently, making new technology is very difficult. It's rife with problems. And you can actually find a lot of old artistic concepts of Project Orion and then some newer ones, utilizing our computer-generated images that we have software for nowadays. Of course, we have different names for that software than we did back in the 1990s and the 2000s. It just looks a little different. Ah, yes, autonomous cars. And this is an article from May 18th, 2018. And the point I'm getting at here is that technology always has design problems when we field it. But we were very optimistic about autonomous cars last decade. And I just thought I'd pull this article from our friends at Wired. It takes a single autonomous car to prevent phantom traffic jams. Just one single car from May 2018. And what's the practical reality? Well, 5 days ago in San Francisco, a place that we often explore, there was a little bit of a traffic jam caused by 3 autonomous cars. So, it's a little bit of a teething problem. There's just a little bit of design flaw when we go through this thing. We have to learn exactly what's going on and how we're actually going to employ this. And there's going to be challenges. There's going to be difficulties. And so I just thought I would mention that. It takes years. And let's be honest, we've talked about autonomous cars for quite a long time. Remember in the 1980s, we were talking about flying cars, but this is the 21st century. We want autonomous cars. 1 could stop a traffic jam and 3 could cause a traffic jam. Well, those sound like good odds to me. But yes, that's where we are right now. And whether you're in San Francisco or Austin, Texas, or anywhere else, it seems that there's going to be challenges with it. But don't worry, I'm sure eventually we'll sort those challenges out. Keep that thought in mind, though. The whole point being is that even with all these great computers and all this incredible software, it is still challenging to field and develop new technology and to create a practical working application. Now, I know you're saying apples and oranges. You're talking about space travel and spacecraft, and now you're talking about transportation on the Great Road System. By the way, when was that road actually built? Not really sure, but that's okay. It's just one of those questions that I ask. I'm getting at the point that there are challenges rife with the development of technology. The Tesla Cybertruck. And let me tell you something. Tesla is a wonderful marketing name. I mean, just the name alone, it causes you to want to buy a vehicle. Let me ask you something. Would you buy this vehicle if it was called an Edison? Would you buy a car if it was called an Edison? The answer is no, absolutely not, because you don't associate Edison with certain things. Yeah, you're right, Griff. It might look ugly, but it's not what it actually looks like in aesthetic appeal. It's all about the name. You just put Tesla in front of it, and then you can have your definitive model name, but it's actually a brilliant marketing strategy. You just have that name and you're ready to go, and that's what you have. And when you hear the name Tesla now, especially in the 21st century, you think of an incredible inventor. You think of an individual who's a genius, who can innovate great solutions, who can come up with inventions on the fly, and really a forward thinker, a futurist, an individual who could do it all. And we explored him before in the whole profit concept, but you affiliate someone who will actually innovate technology that will work and have practical application. I mean, I'm kind of surprised we're not going back and saying that he was actually the one who invented the internet. I mean, we kind of have the hint that he did, but there was some other guy that took credit for it in the 2000s. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I watched South Park, but anyway, not to use that as a source. But it's all in marketing. You hear the name Tesla and you think amazing cutting edge technology. It doesn't matter if the aesthetic appeal of the vehicle is not that great. It's a Tesla. It couldn't possibly go wrong. You would never buy this if it was called an Edison. No, absolutely not. You think of somebody who cheated. You think of somebody who'd throw together some schlocky vehicle just trying to make a profit. But when you call this a Tesla, it doesn't matter. Everybody thinks it's an amazing vehicle. It's all in the mindset. And maybe it is an amazing vehicle. It's not for me to say. By the way, going back to that analogy of marketing, there is actually a restaurant called Croc's. If you ever saw The Founder, starring Michael Keaton as McDonald's founder Ray Kroc, he talked about the value of marketing. Nobody'd want to eat at a place called Croc's. Well, apparently in Virginia Beach, there is actually a place called Croc's. And it looks like they got a good bourbon selection. Well, that'll get anybody in. This is what it actually looks like. Very, very interesting artwork on the side of it. I'm not really sure what food they specialize in because I'll be honest with you, I'm with Michael Keaton as Ray Kroc, who'd really want to eat at a place called Croc's, but I'm sure they do good business. I'm not turning you away from them, just making the reference. There is actually a place called Croc's. So maybe somebody's actually designing a car called the Edison. Remember on Top Gear when they made the Jeff? Yeah, I sure do. And here is Tesla's state funeral that he got. People say that he died and nobody knew about him, but he got a big state funeral, and apparently the entire nation was saddened by the whole matter. And he was buried with full honors. He was also living in a hotel when he passed away. So doesn't exactly give the impression of the penniless individual. Of course, the official history says he was being cared for by many benefactors, and I'm sure that's absolutely true. And he was still respected when he passed away. For some reason, everyone just kind of forgot about him or didn't really talk about him. I mean, even in the 80s, he wasn't mentioned that much. But then in the 90s, you had the band Tesla, you had the Tesla coils that got back to the mainstream through the pop culture references in Command and Conquer. And the next thing you knew, everybody affiliated Tesla with cutting edge technology that was workable and practical. Quite a story, isn't it? And that's what it all boils down to with this. You see, it's all about giving something that the people really want. And a starship concept, a rocket ship that just happens to look like the rocket ship from 1950s science fiction and other stories of that time frame, Amazing Stories, or any one of those other great magazines, and you make that connection. It's wonderful marketing, and it's practical technology. And yes, I know the individual said it may not always work, but it is entertaining if nothing else. And yes, that's a great way to look at it. Maybe that's how we're writing off all those difficulties with the design problems with autonomous cars. Now, I'm going somewhere with all this, so just stay with me. Reality Elevator looks like a B movie. Yes, and that's exactly what it was, 1950s B movies. So yeah, there are a lot of Tesla towers, and they still endure and they still persist to this day. So moving on, this is the USS Monitor, the United States Navy's first ironclad ship. Now, an interesting thing about the USS Monitor is in the late 1850s and the early 1860s, credit should be given where credit's due, and we'll talk about it in a moment, but the Monitor was a cutting-edge revolutionary design. It featured 40 patented inventions on it, although I recall looking at the history, and even before the history was moved to digital files, or, let me just do the AI search, or what we used to call the Google search, or whatever we're calling it today, and you will find that there's only a list of about 12 of these patented inventions. And what are the inventions that are known? Well, it had the revolving turret. It was low in the water. It apparently had flushing toilets on it. Wow, a military naval ship with flushing toilets on it. What an invention. And a couple others, the speaking tube. But you'll never get a full comprehensive list of what all 40 inventions were. The new screw or the new steam engine, apparently that was patented as well. So really at the end of the day, this guy, John Ericsson, a Swedish inventor, was just the master and the jack of all trades. He was really the Tesla before Tesla. He could innovate new technology, 40 patented inventions, and put it all together on a ship that had never been done before. And guess what? It worked. It was successful in the Battle of Hampton Roads. It was built to counter the CSS Virginia, the Confederate ironclad, and John Ericsson built a ship and innovated a ship that had never existed before with 40 patented inventions, although I can only find about 12 specific ones. I'm not suggesting that we don't know what the other 30 to 28 are, depending on what list you look at. It's just interesting to me. Look at the way he's crossing his arms. I mean, this is a guy who can get things done. He can invent things, he can make things up, and he can make it all work together. Now, of course, it should be noted that the Monitor did sink during difficult waters, but this is what happens when we field new technology. There's going to be problems. There's going to be challenges. Won the Battle of Hampton Roads, and then it sank in the water. I guess its design wasn't completely foolproof, but it did bring about a new generation of ships. And everybody forgot about that explosion of the cannon that Ericsson designed on the U.S. frigate Princeton earlier. And, they always say, and you can actually watch the 1990s film Ironclads, they talk about it. He may have designed that cannon, but he didn't actually build it. Gee, I thought anybody who designs something was automatically responsible for the successful conclusion of whatever they designed, like every single architect for every single building. You mean it matters that whoever builds it actually builds it by specification? Why do we never know the builders of anything? Who actually built the cannon? I don't know. Who actually built the buildings? I don't know either. I guess it's not important. And going back to that concept of ironclads, it was very revolutionary. Here was the very first one. It was the French that figured it out in the 1850s. Yes, a long time after the plated armor knight had come about in the 13 or the 1400s, depending on which version of history you look at. We'll just go with the later version. It took them 400 years to figure out that, hey, maybe you could put that armor stuff on naval ships and it'd be rather useful. Yeah, why did it take so long? Now, I know we've had our debates about the practicality of moving around in full plate armor, but What exactly was the holdup with 400 years before figuring it out that you could put this kind of armor on ships and it would be very effective? I don't know. And another question I have is, why in the heck did modern armies go away from it? Well, it just wasn't practical anymore. And once the Swiss figured out how to use special weapons to tear that armor apart, it just wasn't useful. I mean, it was only 30 to 40 pounds. How effective was it? I mean, I was in a European martial arts tournament. I know exactly what it is to wear armor, even though the European martial arts tournaments today are in air-conditioned buildings. But, you know, there's a little bit of difference between marching out in heavy heat and sun with armor on. I think they captured it pretty well in Kingdom of Heaven, but who knows? No one's ever actually fought in a battle like this. We only have accounts. And even if you grew up and lived and fought in the Civil War, this is just as much fantasy to you then as it is to us now. It's just something I like to ponder on. And then, of course, the HMS Warrior. Don't want to forget mentioning the British. They came up with an ironclad too. And something else with the whole concept of bastion forts, the star forts. New technology that came about, what, in the late 1400s? Yes, so the official history says. This was how they responded to increasing capabilities of cannons. We built these incredible and impenetrable star forts or bastion forts. But then we just kind of sat around for 400 years before we figured out we could put armor on naval ships. But that's okay. You know, not everybody catches on that quick. I mean, people like John Erickson do, but not everybody's John Erickson. And of course, we have our little account of what happened with the plan of the fort of Prince of Wales. And that's that star fort that's up in Hudson Bay, where, yes, they went to all the trouble of building it, they being the British. But then they neglected to defend it. They didn't actually have any military personnel. So when the French sent a raiding party of 3 ships, they managed to capture it because, you know, you can build this really cool star fort, but you still actually have to have soldiers stationed at it in order for it to be effective. And the official history says that was not the situation. So what the heck did they build this thing for? I don't know, like wasting money. This is that one that's way up north that we've looked at a couple times. And then, of course, the whole style. Here we have Henry Hudson wearing his frills. And we got Captain Ferriera. This is from the original Shogun wearing frills. Hey, by the way, does anybody know what the purpose of these frills were? Why do we actually have sketch pictures of people wearing them? Well, that's okay. In the new Shogun, we did away with it. We had a more modern look because, you know, that's what we do in all these remakes and reimagines. You know, I kind of miss Captain Ferrier with the frills. Where am I going with all this? Well, what purpose did the frills serve? Was it style or did it keep sweat off your neck? I don't know. It's just one of those interesting things. And so, in conclusion, when we're looking at all this with how does one go about reaching strange lands, what are we really looking at? What's it really about? Oh, yeah, there you go. Catch crumbs. That's a good one. Ah, somebody's looking a little further past that, aren't they? Yes, indeed. Oh, frills to cover pox scars. I wonder. It's very, very interesting. And it's one of those things that I really wonder about and why we have that when we look at history and we're trying to figure out what actually happened, because it does really matter. And so, in conclusion, how does one reach strange lands? Do we go to different lands? Do we fly to them on airships? Do we go to different planets? That's always an important question. Now, as we go and look at each of these different strange lands, what we're going to be examining is, I want you to consider 3 questions. 1, could it exist? What's the practicality behind it? And then question 2, would you want to visit this land? And then question 3, it's very different. Would you want to live there? So without further ado, let's get into the first strange lands we have to consider. We're going to be looking at the Iron Republic. Now, first question I have for you, do you think the Iron Republic is real? Or is it just in the fictional mind of somebody? Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you're asking, what is the Iron Republic? Give me one moment, and I'll get the image up here and show you what it's all about. I'm sure most people know about this concept. It's been around for a while. So from a novel or a series of pulp fiction novels that appeared in magazines in Florida from the very early 1900s, author Richard Jameson Morgan wrote The Iron Republic. Now, what's really, really interesting when you look at the historicity of this or the actual history behind it is that with the Iron Republic, does it really exist? What's it all about? It is a concept of a land that is beyond the ice wall. Now, when Richard Jameson Morgan wrote this, he said, it's a fictional story. It's not made to be taken literally. Of course, if you actually read it the way he wrote it, it is to be taken literally. And what is the Iron Republic? It's this incredible nation state that existed beyond the ice wall of Antarctica. So therefore, taking what some might consider a flat Earth approach to looking at the land. Now, that's just in the context of the work. And I'm sure that'll trigger a lot of people because it's very interesting looking at the programming behind it and how that works. But anyway, you can find this concept of the Iron Republic, that this nation state that existed through the ice wall was a bit of a utopia. Although it should be noted that the story is a little bit vague on how it reached this status and why things worked in balance. It's one of those interesting concept stories, but the hows and the whys aren't addressed so much, which is all right because it's really the idea. I always like some of the works on this. And of course, the Iron Republic has made its way around through alternative researchers and different explorers. How exactly do you reach the Iron Republic? Well, it depends on what the nature of the land really is. Are we on a spinny ball going through space? Are we on a flat land? Are we on something else entirely? Is it four-dimensional? Are there overlapping lands? We can all go back to those concepts. But one of the ideas is that if you look at some of the older models of the land, then the Iron Republic is based on those old models of the flat Earth concept. Yes, caveat, science has disproven this and so on and so forth, and we talk about it many times. And of course, if I just talk about any idea, people will attack me. And I'm glad people are attacking me. It must mean that I'm thinking things I'm not supposed to be thinking, which is good. In the story, the context is that there is access somewhere through the ice that surrounds the land. And where does the Iron Republic exist? Well, somewhere on one of the continents beyond the ice wall, so says the novel. But remember, it's not to be taken seriously, even though the novel is written from a serious perspective. So you get the idea that the author is trying to perhaps publish something that he wasn't supposed to publish. We go back and forth on what the awareness and the understanding of people with scientific concepts in the 1890s to the early 1900s were, just like we go back and forth on whether people from Europe believed the land was flat or if it was round. They always believed that it was a round sphere. How? Who wrote anything from the peasant class in Middle Ages Europe? Who? Well, don't bother asking that question. It's a question you're not supposed to ask. So, reality elevator. There must be so much unknown land, even on the land we can go to. Our world is so large. And that's a good point. And I think, whatever the shape or the actual nature of it is, I think in a lot of ways we don't really grasp how large it is. Now, do we visualize all the lands that are available or don't we? That's a great consideration. So, well, of course, there's always a menacing tower involved, Griff. That's what you need the menacing tower for. Gets a lot of people's imagination going. Well, RB, I'm kind of surprised you haven't heard of this one. Yeah, it's widely available and it was written in Florida. It's kind of right up your purview, isn't it? Anyways. Yeah, it was actually something I read many, many years ago, long before I'd gotten into this myself. But the whole concept of sailing ships being able to reach other lands. And you may recall in the exploration that we did with the True North of Canada, we talked about the questioning of the Arctic. We're going to get back to that, and that's the last land we're going to look at tonight. But there's something interesting to me about the Iron Republic and a connection with what it's affiliated with. Now, oddly enough, a lot of people forget that between World War I and World War II, the nation of Germany experienced a time of a republic. It was called the Weimar Republic. Now, because of the Treaty of Versailles and some of the limitations and the fact that Germany was held responsible for World War I, according to the Treaty of Versailles, that Germany had to pay reparations. And during that time, Germany, a nation which had never had a democracy, was suddenly bestowed with a democracy. That was a republic. Again, we're having fun with words, but the Weimar Republic, 1918 and 1933. Nobody in Germany liked the Weimar Republic or the concept of the Weimar Republic, or as the saying goes, it was a democracy run by people who didn't really want to be in a democracy. It's really, really odd. By the way, there was actually a group in Germany called the Iron Front, and they were social democrats or democratic socialists. They had many different names, but they had these three arrows all together, and they were against monarchy, they were against fascism, and they were against communism. And apparently they were quite active during this period of time. It's rather interesting, all these commonalities and overlaps that you have with all this. Now, what's even stranger about all this, I love this particular image right here, Allied experts in Berlin. So how is Germany going to go about paying these reparations? Its economy was destroyed in World War I, and it just couldn't innovate money. Well, bring in the United States and the economic geniuses from the United States, one individual named Dawes, sitting right here, and the individual named Young next to him. And, they're considered financiers, geniuses. Look at this guy over here. Interesting look on his face. And looks like we have the American version of Victor Newman here. Kind of ironic since the actor who portrays Victor Newman is actually originally from Germany, but whatever. Anyways, they came up with this incredible plan, and we've looked at it before, where they were going to provide loans to Germany So then Germany could pay the reparations to the United Kingdom and France, and then United Kingdom and France could pay back the United States. This gets even more complicated when you factor in World War II. Now, this is one of the interesting loans, and a lot of people don't see this paperwork. German External Loan 1924. So money was just being floated from the United States to prop up Germany. Germany paid the reparations to Britain and France, and then Britain and France paid the money back to the United States. Ah, genius. Loan money to get paid money back for money that you loaned earlier. I mean, how could that economic system ever fail? Interesting. Is this supposed to be Lady Columbia here, or is this Lady Germania? I guess it's Lady Germania because I see the German eagle on the plate there. Very interesting. Oh, I love how they have the airship over here, and we even have the Cathedral of Cologne. What are the odds, huh? Just one of those things. And I'm really just talking about that there is a connection here with the Iron Republic. Thanks, Deadpool Kid. I don't believe the flat earth concept, but I think our world is, in a way, a layered multi-reality, like an onion, a transphysical-like concept. I can definitely see that, and I definitely think there's a concept like that in play, where it still may be possible for physical limitations, but we just don't know. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for the comment. Isabel alive, good to see you back. Didn't want you to think I missed you either. I know I'm rolling fast through this, but there's a lot to cover, and it's been a while since we've done a live stream, so anyway. It's just interesting. A lot of people in the United States aren't even aware of the Dawes or the Young Plan, that the United States was really the force behind this post-war order, because the United States likes to try to step back and say, no, we didn't have anything to do with the post-war order in World War I. We didn't want to be part of the League of Nations. Sure, but we did implement the financial plan, and we know what happened when that financial plan fell apart with the Great Depression, don't we? Yes, we certainly do. It led to the complete collapse of the Weimar Republic, and we know who came to power in Germany. And no, it was not the Iron Front. But it's really, really intriguing, though. And oddly enough, you'll see lots of images like this all across the land where you have soldiers here handing out food because everybody just couldn't get jobs and they couldn't get food. That strange Great Depression. And so it's interesting considering that you have the Weimar Republic in Germany, you have these connections of Germany exploring this area of Antarctica, and then you have this earlier story of the Iron Republic written by some guy in Florida in the very early 1900s. So just a lot of different interesting connections that we tend to overlook on all this. So anyway, I know I've covered a lot so far, and we're going to go on our 2-minute break a little early in this particular exploration because I want you to be able to reset your minds and really think about what we've talked about so far. Because really think about the application of technology, the difficulty in how we have to field technology, and how even with everything that we have today, we still can't even get it to work right now because it takes time. Yet the official history tells us that we were able to innovate and implement technology very, very quickly. So anyway, before we go on our 2-minute break, be sure you hit that like button. And we're going to go on and talk about something, a land you may have heard of, you may have not, a land called Barsoom. Someone may know what I'm talking about, and maybe they don't. So anyway, stick around, and we'll see you in 2 minutes, and we'll explore Barsoom. Be right back. All right, we're back, and now we're going to take a look at Barsoom. And let's see, what did I just miss right here? Deadpool Kid. 3 examples from public sources. John Keel, Super Spectrum, Rudolf Steiner's 8 Spheres of the Higher and Lower Dimensions, and Russian mystic Daniel Andrews' Rose of the World. Interesting. Yeah, some potential facts and some potential, how shall we say, discrepancies in all of those works. Thanks for sharing. All right, Barsoom. Yes, does anybody know what the heck I'm talking about with Barsoom here? Let me get up the first images here, because you may know who this individual is that we're about to show. And here we go. Does anybody know who this individual is? Let me make sure I have this full screen image, and there we are. Ah, John Carter. Yes, I had a feeling somebody out there might know. Well, that's the name of the character. Yeah, Jamie, of course you know. I'm not surprised whatsoever. Who wrote John Carter? Listening to John Carter on Audible. Ah, yes. No, not Alan Watts. Ah, yeah, of course. Leave it to Jamie to know. Yes. Author Edgar Rice Burroughs. Edgar Rice Burroughs had quite an interesting upbringing as he was going about his life. And it's interesting to note that when he started, he went to this place, the Phillips Academy in Massachusetts. Nice old world building there. And they got some good ones in Massachusetts. But then he also went to this one, St. Mary's Prep Building. This was part of Michigan Military Academy. I thought it was interesting to note, and this is in the late 1800s when Edgar Rice Burroughs was being brought up. Very interesting career track this guy had too, going to these academies and then working odd and end jobs. And then just suddenly he made it big when he wrote his famous character. Does anybody know who the famous character that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote aside from John Carter? Tesla's uncle. Yeah, isn't that the truth? Well, he actually wrote Tarzan. There you go. Good job, Chris. Yes. Considered one of the most well-known literary characters in the history of the world, I guess, depending on who we're asking. I show this because a lot of people aren't aware that there's actually military academies up north. A lot of people think all the military academies are in the South or the old South of the United States, but there were plenty of military academies in places like Michigan and even Wisconsin. This being St. John's Northwestern Academy, nice little castle. This is in Delafield, Wisconsin, so it's on the outskirts of Milwaukee, right in between Madison and Milwaukee. Yeah, nice little castle there. It's still standing to this day, and it functions as a military academy in Delafield, Wisconsin. There's even this one. This is the old one. This is the Northwestern Academy of the Navy. I think that was the name of it. Davidson Hall off of Geneva Lake. So it's not enough that they had that incredible, or they still have that incredible observatory there. They also had this Naval Academy in this old world building. Makes you wonder what was going on there. And of course, it's a wedding venue to this day. So if you need any more confirmation it's an old world building, well, that's where you can go and get married. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's a fairy tale wedding. It's a castle, right? And you got a castle right there in Wisconsin. So who wouldn't get married? Anyway, back to Edgar Rice Burroughs in A Princess of Mars. Barsoom was actually the name that the locals called Mars. And it's really intriguing because these books really inspired a lot of different thoughts, and they had a lot of different considerations and concepts with them. A lot of people would even say that it was the birth of modern science fiction. I mean, yes, you had Jules Verne, and we've looked at Jules Verne before, but there was something about these novels that was really speaking to a completely different line of fantasy and science fiction. And so that's what we have with it. And when we look at the concepts behind the lands that were really depicted in Barsoom. Now, yes, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the recent movie made by Disney. What was that? 2012. That came out. They just called it John Carter. Very, very interesting. Because who would even make the affiliation? Some guy named John Carter. What's so big about that? It's really, really odd. Now, you might be surprised to hear this from me because I actually enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed this movie. It wasn't a remake. I mean, yes, it was the first adaptation of a novel, but it wasn't too bad. But, there was this little brief period of time where it seemed like they were going a different direction creatively, Disney with this and Tron, and then didn't really market it, didn't give it the right title, and so it all kind of fell to pieces. But that's okay. Things happen for a reason, right? Anyways. Going to the older concepts, though, of Barsoom, there were actual maps and everything. And it's really interesting because when you look at the old maps of Barsoom and the modern adapted maps, it's funny how it's always one of those concepts that we have with our current maps. Is it a sphere? Is it a flatland? Not really sure. Barsoom, the land that John Carter, and if you're not familiar with the story, here's where it gets controversial, at least now. It wasn't controversial when it was written, apparently. John Carter was a Confederate veteran from the United States Civil War. So not exactly someone who makes a great protagonist in this day and age. You know, things have changed. But I thought it was interesting to pull back the Terra Infinita map. Do we think of Mars as being a separate planet? Or could it be a separate land, the land of Mars that's nearby? And that's really what Barsoom is. A couple different ways to look at it. And that's where I really find it fascinating and interesting that such a thing could really happen. And when you look at some of the older artwork of Barsoom, and, you know, again, that whole concept of, am I pushing flatland? No, I'm simply saying that there are multiple ways to look at things. And maybe there is a way to access Barsoom and these other lands. You don't physically go directly to them. There's another way that you access them. What exactly is a portal? That's something that we leave open because we don't know. And no, it's interesting to me that we haven't had any more, how shall we say, crewed missions to the moon since the early 1970s. And so what's really going on? Do we just not care? Is there just nothing there to go explore? And, you know, we're not explorers anymore? Huh? Maybe that's the concept. I'm not really sure. But when you look at some of the old artwork from the Barsoom saga, as it's called, or Mars, Barsoom is what the locals called it, you get this very interesting and intriguing fantasy land. There's always this crumbling, fantastic architecture in the background, this unique array of creatures. Oh, and yes, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Willem Dafoe actually voiced a character in John Carter. So, I mean, it was well cast. I mean, it even had the guy who played Caesar in it. How could you go wrong? But anyway. But you see this in a lot of the artwork, these interesting fantasy creatures, these incredible ruins, or maybe not ruins, but active buildings that oddly enough seem to look like structures that we see. And this is the original artwork that we're looking at. You know, if we go off of what the whole fantasy concept really was. Now, I know what a lot of people are going to say. Oh, you're blending fantasy and reality again. Why are you doing that? That just really drives me nuts. Yeah, and you know what? I appreciate classic, nice art. I appreciate the human factor in it and the fact that it's not something that can be easily reproduced today. You can't really program that. So it's just one of those interesting things that we have, and somebody said it right there, synchronicity. It's a definite synchronicity. And it's also intriguing when you think about the background of these people who innovated these stories, whether it was Jules Verne or Edgar Rice Burroughs. And no, it seemed like John Carter, the film and the entire franchise, was set up to fall flat on its face. It's really strange. I mean, maybe not. Maybe they were really trying and it just didn't work out. That's possible. I just don't think it's probable, but that's my opinion. Take it or leave it. But I love looking at the early artwork where you see this. And here's a better view of the map with the different regions. Very, very interesting that it does seem to parallel the same concept. Artolian Hills. It does seem to parallel the same concept that we have with our maps of our own land. So is it possible that this is a land, another land out there that we could access? Now, again, whether you want to think of it as another planet, a spinny ball somewhere through space, or a different kind of land that you access. Here's the older map that, by the way, just happens to work, laying it out flat. How interesting. And I know what you're going to say. Well, wait a minute. You're looking at different maps of Barsoom. How do you know which one's correct? Well, how do we know which map of our land that we're on is actually correct? Because it's been scientifically proven. Yes, I know. The International Space Station is up there and they can verify everything. And you should just watch that wonderful footage that they've been showing on many different channels and platforms for all these years. Sure, it's widely available and it looks really cool. And if you play it with some music, it's very relaxing. I'm not going to deny it. But does it necessarily prove anything beyond a shadow of a doubt? Maybe. I guess it depends on, do you trust your eyes? And remember that whole concept of when we talked about when you look into the distant horizon, how objects and things that you see can be visually distorted. This is some of the other original artwork from Barsoom. And I think it gives you this concept of all these incredible locations and something that just really did. I mean, we talk about it now. We talk about how we lack world building in our current franchises. That's why we're constantly just redoing existing, what we call intellectual properties now. But let's be honest, in the 20th century, we called these stories. We called this a universe We're in the Star Trek universe. We're in the Star Wars universe. It's an intellectual property. Yeah. That's why we have so many ridiculous names for football bowl games in the United States now as well. You're going to be participating in the Urinal Cake Bowl today, and there's all this drama, just like there used to be all this drama behind the Professional Wrestling World Wrestling Federation in the 1980s, right? Excuse me, World Wrestling Entertainment now. By the way, did you know that World Wrestling Entertainment actually has its own tab under ESPN? So you can look up wrestling as though it's a legitimate sport now. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a legitimate sport. It's sports entertainment. So I guess the results of the matches are real too now. I don't know. I'm confused. Maybe you are too. But there's been all kinds of concepts with Barsoom, and there are other analogies that we have, such as the concept of advanced airships, advanced architecture, different societies, and fantastic creatures. Now, why is it you get away with writing this in science fiction? Well, because back in the day, it was just science fiction. It wasn't anything that was to be taken with reality, so to speak. Although if you go to any bookstore, I'll just call one out. I used to enjoy going to Barnes & Noble bookstores about 20 years ago. Why? Because the science fiction section usually took up a good 25 to 30%. But that's not the case anymore. Now you're lucky if you can find a single shelf of science fiction. And of course, it's all the regular science fiction works. Not that I have anything against all the young adult content, and I'm delighted young adults are reading, but that seems to be taking up most of the Barnes & Noble shelf. So I guess that's what they're selling. But yeah. Didn't we used to have terms like realms? Well, we did and we didn't. I guess it depends who you believe and who you're actually going to go off of with the historiosity and terminology use. I sometimes think that we're just changing terms to keep people confused very intentionally. So, anyways, on with Barsoom and looking at the different older art with it. It gave you this idea, though, of these older civilizations. And there was a lot of, at the time, it was just seen as science fiction. But if you go and you read some of the civilizations that existed that are very well detailed and the fantastic creatures, you'll find that there's a lot of analogies for the things that we've been looking at and exploring. So I guess in the end, is Barsoom a real place? Would you want to go there? Would you want to live there? Well, you're not going to see a sequel, not from anybody on it, and you're probably never going to see a remake from it, but you can definitely go back and read the books, and that's what I'd recommend anyway. I mean, when I say the movie's not that bad, that's a high compliment for me. I guess I'm just a little selective is all I'm going to say. But you can find even more modern iterations of the artwork that give you an idea. Here we're looking at the Great Arena in Barsoom, and yet we do see a lot of parallels with the things that we've explored. Did this arena have a different purpose? How does it match stadiums? This is all something that we see, and yet science fiction authors apparently were inspired by this or by some other concept. So, anyway. Well, yeah, you know how it goes, Griff's Report. It's just one of those things. Ever since the start of November, something happened in the start of November. I'm not sure. Got mentioned somewhere, and then all of a sudden there was all this interesting attention. It's really, really odd. But anyway, here's a good comment. Don't make any good SF movies anymore. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. It just feels like we're retreading a lot of stuff. But, it might be different tomorrow, right? Okay, so the moment you've all been waiting for. Beyond the Arctic. And we're going to take a little bit of time to really dive into this. So, why are we talking about the Arctic? I thought we were going to talk about the Antarctic. Well, we got another time we're going to be talking about that one. But the Arctic is the one that really caught my attention recently. And there's a couple different reasons for that. It's because of the fact that we seem to go back and forth with where our attention is supposed to be directed. Okie dokie. Let's get this image up. Who remembers this particular exploration? And who remembers this map? Let me go full screen on this one. There you go. And where's my banner? Yeah, they change everything, don't they? Oh, I see what the problem is. 1 second. Okay. There we go. Beyond the Arctic. And why is it that we have these maps? Yep, Mercator. Yes, he certainly does. But would you be surprised to know that this map actually had a lot of serious academic conversation about it back in the 1980s and the 1990s? Although not for the reasons you might think, which I found very peculiar. And what am I really getting at with that? Old World Delaware, the North Pole is way more interesting than the South Pole. There's actually a couple reasons that I think it is. Now, if you watched the last exploration on the channel, well, the banner is gone again. That's okay. If you watch the last exploration on the channel, The True North, we talked about the efforts to reach the North Pole. We talked about how Robert Peary from the United States naval officer, said that he reached it over land with a sled dog team. But then another guy, Wally, from the United Kingdom in the 1960s, just a few short months before Apollo 11, I'm not making this up, was actually the first guy who took a sled dog team across the North Pole and across the Pole of Inaccessibility. Yes, that's a real term. I'm not making this up. But you may recall that there was that Canadian Arctic expedition, the Arctic expedition nobody talks about. Everybody talks about the Franklin expedition that wasn't looking for anything in the Arctic. They were just trying to find the Northwest Passage. And then they got stuck in the ice, and you probably saw the TV show. By the way, that had Caesar in it as well. Syrian Hines? Yeah. He shows up a lot. He was even in Excalibur, believe it or not. The original Excalibur. So back on topic. When you look at what they were actually looking for, everybody talks about the Franklin expedition, the fact that the ships got stuck in ice. And yes, if you do search, you can find that, yes, we located both the ships and we even located the mummified remains of the crew, I guess. But nobody even talks about the Canadian expedition or the Canadian Arctic expedition that was run by a Canadian guy who was educated at the University of Iowa. You really can't make this stuff up. I mean, is this all just coming from my mind? I don't know. Maybe I need to be checked. But anyway, the whole goal of that expedition, though, controversially, was to find land north of the Canadian archipelago. And when you look at the Mercator map, and by the way, it's also shown on the Urbano Monte map, which was made in the same time frame, late 1580s, and this is from the mid 1590s. Who knows when this was originally drawn or when it was. They show these very definitive land masses up here in the Arctic. And what does science say is up there now? Nothing. It is an ocean. It is frozen ice. And that's why ships get trapped in the ice up there. And you might remember when we looked at that operation, we had Captain Bartlett, a guy who spent 50 years of his life sailing up there. You think he would know more about it than anything else. You would think that somebody else would have actually gotten up there. But there was all the controversy. No, Robert Peary didn't actually go up there. His competitor checked his observations and his reports and said he must have changed them. Oh, a U.S. naval officer that lied. How about that? Well, I'm sure Wally, when he went across the North Pole, wasn't lying about anything. Not at all. Nobody lies. And then you might recall our great polar explorer from the United States, another naval officer, Mr. Byrd, Commander Byrd, Admiral Byrd, when he flew his plane up there, when he was Commander Byrd at the time. He said he flew his plane over the North Pole, but then our good friend from Norway said, no, he didn't actually get up there. Roald Amundsen, I'm the one who got up there. And how did he do it? He did it in an airship, the Norge. So it's really strange. It's almost as though they're saying there was no way you could reach the North Pole unless you took an airship. And that's why in the late 1960s, somebody had to reach it on a sled dog team. Otherwise, people might have been asking questions they shouldn't have been. I mean, even with all that going on, I'm going to admit I'm still asking questions because it just doesn't make any sense. New West Reset, great to see you. You know, I had a little line that I didn't get to insert in the last video, and I was going to say there's a lot of great people in Canada. There's New West Reset, there's Old World Exploration, and there's Catherine Mary Stewart. Just remember, I was going to say that, but not everything gets in my final exploration. So just want to let you know, I haven't forgotten about you. Hope all's going well. Anyways, it's one of those things that always intrigued me, though, because of all this controversy about who got to the North Pole first. Well, of course, it was the Norwegian guy. The Norwegians are the experts in getting to the poles. Of course, what happened to Roald Amundsen? He disappeared, died looking for a lost expedition to the North Pole. So the official history says, who knows for sure. And why wasn't this Canadian guy's expedition more successful? He took a sled dog team all around and officially did locate new lands, but he never located this continent. That was apparently the statement of his expedition. Is there land up there? Isn't there land up there? I don't really know. I do think there's something going on, though, that is very intriguing because we have these official accounts that are contradicting. We have explorers that are questioning other explorers who actually got up there. By the way, the United States Congress did recognize Robert Peary's achievement, and they obviously recognized good old Richard E. Byrd. So what gives? Well, I know it's just the Americans being Americans. What actually is going on up there, though, in the Arctic? Is there anything worthwhile? I mean, normally what you'd think is it's a frozen tundra. There's nothing worth seeing up there anyway. It's just all ice and there's nothing interesting. However, for a place that's not interesting, it's suffice to say that Greenland all the way across northern Canada had a lot of interest, especially during the Cold War. Now, the official history says that that was the establishment of the DEW, or the Distant Early Warning Line. And this involved the United States and Canada working together, pouring a lot of resources to build all of these radar bases to warn about initially what was a bomber attack from the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Because remember, the United States did a great job of equipping the Soviet Union to fight World War II. But then, things changed after World War II, apparently. And so now the United States had to work with its Western allies to make sure that the Soviet Union didn't launch a surprise attack. And so therefore they poured all these resources to establishing these distant early warning bases. Very interesting. And who in their right mind would actually try to launch an air attack across the Arctic? Isn't it rather difficult to fly? There's also the coincidence that there is the space base. Yes, used to have a different name. We'll get to it in a moment, but this is the United States Space Force that's operating in Greenland. Very, very interesting, with some rather interesting visual anomalies. I know it's Northern Lights, and you can see Northern Lights in Minnesota. And what do you call it down south? I always forget. Jamie, anybody from Australia? What's the name you have for Northern Lights down there? Not Southern Lights. That would just be a little too cliche, wouldn't it? Well, and there you go. Yeah. Prohibited airspace, controlled airspace. You're absolutely right, Lori Lee. Absolutely right. And you may have heard what happened to that pilot who was trying to do the same thing down in the South Pole area. I mean, you can't just go rolling around down there. Now, you can accept whatever reasons. Aurora Borealis. Yes. Okay. Thule, Thule, all the different names for it. Yes, that's what that air base used to be called when it was a critical air base during the Cold War. But it's still up there, and it's now a Space Force base. What are the odds? RB, that pilot hasn't been heard from. Yeah, him and many others. This is very, very true. But looking at some other examples, what the heck is this? If you ever look at Greenland, there's some very interesting terrain features there. Now, I'm not suggesting there's anything overly unique about these terrain features. They're just very unique. There was also that less than sufficient film called Greenland that came out a couple years ago. Yeah, I wasn't quite as fond of that as I was about the John Carter movie, but yeah. So a very, very interesting terrain feature. I don't know, for some reason, it's reminding me of that very interesting terrain feature that's not too far from McMurdo, the U.S. Antarctica Research Station, which has absolutely no military personnel at it, except when it does. But anyway, yeah. Here's an aerial picture of what used to be Thule Air Base, Tully, however we're pronouncing it today. And there you can see that very interesting terrain feature over there. By the way, that reminds me, one of these live streams, we're going to have to do an in-depth exploration of those incredible tabletop mountains that are in South America. Those are very interesting. Very, very interesting. There's all kinds of unique terrain features up there in Greenland. And then, of course, there's also the very well-documented and well-known establishment of underground bases, and then some interesting studies that the United States Army did in that area. So a lot of attention, a lot of resources by the greatest, or at least we'll say the most financially well-equipped military in the land to be involved in a particular area. And make no mistake about it, the Soviet Union and Russia had equivalent operations with equivalent effort in their particular necks of the woods, especially when you look at where they detonated Tsar Bomba officially. Anyway, it makes it very, very intriguing. Hey, Kathy, good to see you. Yes, probably the prototype, if you will, or maybe even at least the first published prototype of that particular term, underground military bases. They don't really exist, except for when they do. Raven Rock, anybody? Anyways. But yes, you'll find all these images and all this effort and all these military personnel operating in these extreme areas, especially throughout the duration of the Cold War. So it's really, really intriguing that when it looked like the Cold War was really going to get hot, the place that it was focused on was Germany, Checkpoint Charlie, Berlin, East Germany, West Germany. But there was all this effort up in the Arctic area because I guess it was just so easy to launch an invasion force. Now, if you're launching intercontinental ballistic missiles, what's it matter? But, in the 50s and the 60s when they built this, the real threat was from bombers, airplanes. So the word said. There's been all kinds of interesting, well-documented scientific experiments that do, in fact, continue in Greenland to this day. So it's rather intriguing. And then when you look at the origin of a lot of Admiral Byrd's original missions and studies, they actually involved doing studies in both Greenland and the Arctic and the Antarctic, as though the two areas were interchangeable. And here you can see the exact location of Thule Air Base, or what is now the Space Base, and Camp Sentry. That's where the United States Army did their little digging project that we looked at. Very, very far north in Greenland. And you might recall that Greenland is something that's kind of altered on these maps. Sometimes it's depicted as south to north, other times it's shown running west to east. It's very peculiar. Oh, those cartographers just didn't know what they were doing. And if you look hard enough, you can actually find images that show there were some extensive developments down there. I don't know. Was that hokey film Greenland a little bit more real than we realized? Maybe, maybe not. But hey, thanks for that, New West Reset. I appreciate that. But it is very, very well documented that there was a lot of effort going in there. And so what was actually happening? Was there something going on up there that we were not supposed to be privy to? And I know the answer will be, well, of course there was. We had to do anything and everything to defend the United States and the Western nations from a surprise attack from the Soviet Union. Yes, 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 yes. And that just happens to work out really well. And so here you have Old Thule Air Base, and over here, Station Nord. This is that research station. And here you're really talking about an area that's in questionable terrain. And when I say questionable terrain, coming right up in the Arctic area in what's just supposed to be an ice field. Yes, it's very intriguing. A lot of effort, and then, of course, a lot of attention that's still on this area. But, we'll talk about Antarctica. Which one's more interesting? Depends on the day that we're talking about. Here's an image from Station Nord. And, of course, it gives you that inhospitable idea that you'll get if you're anywhere in Antarctica. It's covered with snow and ice. Who in their right mind would want to go there? What's remotely unique? Who wants to be cold? I mean, right now there's a cold spell in the northern United States. And, it's not exactly fun to go around outside. So you can understand it. But you have to wonder, there's other accounts. There's other reports. Why would anybody be putting in all this effort? Why did they put in all this effort for decades? Did they really need all this time to figure this out? There wasn't a better way that they could have managed the Soviet Union. Maybe the United States could have just said, hey, you can't destroy us because you still owe us money. And by the way, I'm talking about the Land Lease Project and all the materials that the United States provided the Soviet Union during World War II. And by the way, officially, that was all paid back very recently, in fact, as was all the land lease to the United Kingdom. So I guess at the end of the day, the Dawes Plan was effective, was it not? You also have older accounts of all this interesting exploration of the Arctic with these different explorers using balloons and airships and other sorts of ideas. It's really odd because what's the actual distance of the terrain up there? And when you look at something like the Franklin expedition, you get the idea that there's a lot more terrain or a lot more land up there than any map that we have, whether it's a flat map or a globe map or whatever you want to call it, a globe, a sphere, whatever, gives you the impression is actually up there. It's really strange. Well, when the Franklin expedition got stuck in ice, they had to walk. They had to walk a long way. This particular image here details another expedition that was supposed to occur, not the Wally expedition, as I like to call it, the guy from the 1960s who took his dog team up there. But there was actually a crew back in last decade that was going to drive across the Arctic. But unfortunately, they were stopped from their mission because, you just can't go to the Arctic. There's a lot of considerations up there, and we have to be very, very careful. And they were going to do it in these incredible Land Cruiser vehicles. I think I got a picture of that up here. Yes, they were detained by local authorities and weren't able to continue with what they were doing. Again, does this sound remotely familiar? Well, yeah, actually, a lot of simulations are flat, since you bring that up, Squiggles. I mean, really, anything that you do on any computer screen is flat. And like I said, unless somebody has a 3D computer screen out there that I don't know about, we're all looking at flat screens right now, are we not? But it's a great question. So, yeah, a lot of simulations are flat, at least in terms of how we see them. Oh, there you go, Kathy. Posers. Yes, that's a good one. Oh, there you go. That's a good one, Old World Delaware. I guess all those old cartographers were sci-fi fans. Yeah, everybody was just looking to push the boundaries of the land. And, I think I'll show some land up there when there's really not. It's really, really intriguing. So, just so many different considerations. Oh, there's the old patch for Thule Air Base. Hey, look at that. They happen to show that terrain feature there. Well, you know what? If you got something, you may as well put it there, right? Now, here's something else that's really, really intriguing. And we talk about this. All these accounts that we have of the 17 and the 1800s of all these ships, naval ships, sailing ships that were looking for this Northwest Passage in this area that they know would freeze. And of course, the most famous example being the Franklin expedition, that the ships got stuck in the ice. So the official story goes, and they found them later. There was all this effort because the Northwest Passage was going to save a lot of time and money. because I guess, they didn't have the Panama Canal. They had talked about a canal in Nicaragua, but the Panama Canal wasn't built until, the early 1900s. The French started it in the 1800s, but the United States finished it because they had Teddy Roosevelt. Remember, whenever you have a Roosevelt, you're going to have a policy success. Doesn't matter whether it's foreign policy, doesn't matter whether it's domestic policy. Roosevelt's only succeed in the United States. Don't forget that. Anyway, Teddy Roosevelt built the Panama Canal. But prior to that, how the heck are you going to sail through this area? Now, here's something else I wanted to talk about that always gets my gander about the Arctic Ocean. Around the Arctic Ocean, you have all of these independent seas here listed. Ah, yes, the Chukchi Sea. That's where Captain Cook went a little bonkers. Then he went to Hawaii and he got bonked on the head. And no, I'm not being facetious about that. That's exactly what happened. They say that Captain Cook started acting erratically for reasons unknown. They believe it was food poisoning or he just wasn't feeling good when he sailed through what is today the Bering Strait in the Chukchi Sea, and then went to Hawaii and met his untimely demise. Or maybe it was a timely demise if he was acting badly with interacting with the natives. Who knows? But you have all these different seas. Why do we have all these labeled seas here in what's just supposed to be the Arctic Ocean? It's really peculiar. It's kind of like the same concept in the Atlantic why you have the Sargasso Sea. It's not really a sea, is it? I mean, it's just a component of an existing ocean. This is one of those little questions I had. It really doesn't make a lot of sense in what's just supposed to be a giant Arctic Ocean, does it? That freezes all the time. But yet we have all these designated seas. Now, what would make more sense? Well, would it make more sense if there was an entirely different concept of the land? If the Mercator map actually did exist, if there really were land masses up here? Well, if there were land masses up here, then would these seas make a little bit more sense? I'm not necessarily saying it proves anything, just that I find it very interesting. It's another one of those little details. Yeah, there you go, New West Reset. I thought there were 7 seas. I guess it depends who we're asking and, the time of day and time of the week. How many do we have labeled up here? Let's see. Greenland, Norwegian, Barents, Kara, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is Baffin Bay a sea? No, it's a bay, right? That's where things went south or north, so to speak, for the Franklin expedition officially. Yeah, there you go. Captain Cooked. Makes me really wonder on that one as well. Well, is it an effect? Is it a changing of history, or is it historical revision? Those two seem to run together in a lot of times, and it becomes difficult to reconcile them, especially when you're looking at what events transpired. Really, anything before 1950 becomes very problematic and difficult. Yeah, that's a great way to say it, Golden Child. Things that make you go, And this is something that's made me go, for a very long time. Oh, yeah, don't forget about the Sultan Sea. That's a very interesting one. And we always talk about how on the Urbano Monte map, we have a different depiction of California. So tune into the exploration this week. We actually take a close look at that when that comes out. So, well, it's interesting, Divinity. I mean, somebody decides and somebody makes a declaration and says, yes, why do you need an East Siberian Sea? Why do you need a Chukchi Sea? What's the point behind it? Well, we need to designate this particular area of water that falls between these lines of latitude and longitude. Oh, so then when I shoot my position and I know exactly where I am, I know I'm in the Chukchi Sea as opposed to the East Siberian Sea, right? It's just one of those things. North Pole is now a name of a town in Alaska. I'm surprised it took them that long. Just call Point Barrow. Well, they don't even call it Point Barrow anymore, do they? Yeah, they used to have this interesting little place up there called the Northern Warfare School. The United States military closed that down too. I don't think they have it going around. Great observation. Well, if you're complimenting me, RB, thank you. And if you're complimenting something else, then thank them. But yeah, anyways, missed what you said earlier. Ah, yes, Stabulator. Good observation there. And thank you for calling that out. I sometimes miss that one. And why is there 3 hours missing from the international date line? So what Stabulator is talking about is, and you can look this up yourself, there's just some interesting, we'll just say, anomalies that occur with flying or going from Western Alaska to what is today Eastern Russia. And you may recall Wrangel Island up there where we did our exploration, where our great explorer from Canada decided to try to colonize Wrangel Island with 4 whole people. And apparently it caused an international incident. Yeah, I always found that questionable. Who in the heck even cared that anybody was up there? I mean, the ship being stuck there didn't cause an international incident. Why? They had a flag. I mean, does somebody just hang a flag from their house in the United States and it's going to cause an international incident? I mean, no, it's the United States. You have your amendment rights guaranteed by the Constitution, right? But it's just one of those little details. Ah, yes, these were the trucks that were trying to do this incredible crossing of the Arctic until they were stopped by the authorities because they hadn't received the proper clearance. It kind of reminds me of those, what were they called? Landmasters from Damnation Alley. Yes, the 1970s film that was supposed to be even bigger than Star Wars. Star Wars wasn't supposed to succeed. Yeah. It's actually an interesting movie to still watch. You can see a young Freddy Krueger in it, and you can see Hannibal before he became Hannibal. It's quite intriguing. So what are your thoughts on what's actually going on? Let me go back to the Mercator map here. And I'm not going to flip back too fast. I'll just go rather slow. But looking at these different maps, these different concepts for the Arctic, all this effort and all this time that's been devoted to it, and the official explanation being it was all for defense purposes. It's for conflict purposes, of course. So why didn't the Soviet Union just roll over Germany when the United States was practically disarmed at the end of the 1940s? Well, they didn't know that the United States couldn't stop them. Yes, of course, we didn't know. We had good intelligence, but nobody was paying attention when the United States was chucking military equipment into the ocean. Nobody was paying attention when the United States military was woefully unprepared for the Korean War and sent divisions from Japan that were at half strength and half equipping. And they didn't even have any heavy weapons that could stop the T-34 tank. You'd think somebody would have been paying attention and realized that, the United States does not have the capability to stop a land invasion. Maybe we should take advantage of it. Nah, we don't do surprise attacks, only in certain areas. It's really, really weird. Now, I'm not questioning the official history. I'm just saying it's interesting when people don't exactly know what happened or what transpired. And that's probably the real point behind all these explorations. Can we really reach strange lands? Do they really exist? If these lands do exist, that Mercator and Monte drew back in the 1500s, that they seem to know were there, and by the way, they're not the only two cartographers that drew out these lands, then what does it really say? Does it say that there are really lands out there? Because officially, the Canadian Arctic Expedition discovered many islands in the Canadian archipelago that had not been plotted before. And you may have heard in recent news releases that many islands are still being discovered north of Japan and elsewhere. I know they're islands, they're not continents, right? Right? But is it possible that there really could be a landmass up there? Is there something very, very strange going on in the area that we consider the Arctic? And that's why, much like the Antarctic, it is very tightly controlled. That it's not an area that you really want to go, and it's not an area you really want to think about. What was the real nature of this land? Does it exist at some kind of nexus point, if you will? Kathy, good comment here. We'll be able to reach these lands someday. And maybe that's just it. And that was the technology that we had in previous civilizations, that they had a true understanding of what the real nature of our reality is, or at least they could interface with it a little better. Maybe the real reason we can't reach these lands is they're in some kind of nexus point, some kind of tesseract, or some kind of merging of physical realities, for all we know. And somewhere, some way, these continents do still exist somewhere. Who's to say? Yeah, Golden Child says it really well. Maybe not, but do exist. More like, what timeline did they exist in? That's possible too, if we're talking alternate timelines. Malfunction. Well, just pull a Captain Kirk on me. Lazarus, right? Because Captain Kirk could talk any computer into destroying itself. He was that good. And RB says that's why they got rid of airships. And that's what I don't wonder, RB, especially with the Norge. And actually, the first documented account of reaching the North Pole, they say they used an airship to do it. No sled dog teams, no sailing ships, not even a flippin' submarine. And for those of you who want to look into that account, that joint mission between the Graf Zeppelin and the submarine that they renamed the Nautilus, a repurposed World War I submarine, that was funded by William Randolph Hearst. No, I'm not making this up. In the late 1920s, early 1930s, planning, preparation, and execution, that all occurred during that time frame. Well, the Graf Z got up there, but of course the submarine, it just wasn't up to the task, and so they called it off. But yeah, it's very, very intriguing. So that's a good one, Texas. Since I lost my sense of sense, I don't smell anything fishy. No, and why should any of us? Why would we? I'm a smell seer. I can smell the future. Yes. It is intriguing, though. And it is also intriguing, though, how we don't really seem to get definitive answers. We don't just, get some good imagery of this particular area or some convincing imagery. I mean, maybe you're convinced. I don't think I am, but time have to ask. That's an interesting one there, Stephanie. Well, it depends. Are we dealing with an actual AI or are we dealing with our programmable deep learning AI? Because, if you look it up, they'll tell you exactly what artificial intelligence really is today. And no, it's not the HAL 9000. It's not even Knight Industries 2000. But that's okay. You got that affiliation. We all grew up watching that. And even if you didn't grow up watching that, your parents or whoever raised you actually did, and they'll tell you all about it. Some old coot like me telling you about the classic days of Knight Rider and the HAL 9000. Look out. Here's a good one. Ev in the chat. Did they build all those airship ports on skyscrapers in anticipation of airship travel, or did they build them in concurrence with airship travel? That's a very interesting point. And if you ever decide to try to get through that rather intriguing and yet rather difficult to watch Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, I'm just going to be honest with you, I've got kind of a love-hate relationship with that film. Parts of it I really like, parts of it I'm kind of scratching my head. It does really make you wonder, especially when you look up the very history of the Empire State Building itself. It's very, very intriguing. Yeah, open the pod bay doors, Hal. Need to get back in right now. Darn, I forgot my space helmet. Oh, Jamie, Tomorrowland. Yes. The concept of Tomorrowland. Now, are we really actually being given hints and clues in various locations across the land? Or are we just being poked in the eye and just basically being lampooned, made fun of? I mean, it could go either way. Oh, yes, the Midwinter Exposition of 1894. By the way, make sure you tune into the exploration coming out on Monday because I have a little bit of a different theory on the World's Fairs and Expositions. No, the exploration is not about that exclusively, but I do introduce that theory there. So by all means, tune in and let me know what you think. So probably the poke. Yeah. Anyways, so for the next live stream, it'll either be next Saturday, the following Saturday, or when I feel like getting around to it. We're going to take a look at some of these interesting terrain features like the tabletop mountains, because as luck would have it, I do have some more direct footage of the tabletop mountains, and there's some, how should we say, interesting anomalies. And I don't think there'll be any issue with me showing it because this footage has appeared elsewhere, but perhaps you haven't seen it. So anyway, hope everybody enjoyed this rather unique live stream. I'm trying to get off the beaten path a little bit more, looking at things through a different perspective and a different lens. But please hit that like button. Thank you for supporting the channel. And I assure you that no matter what headwinds, what odd things occur, or whatever else happens, that I have no intention of dropping this, and I have no intention of stopping to explore. And I'm not someone who just stops doing things, because I'm curious. And if somebody tries to stop me from doing something, that's just going to make me more curious. So, if that's the goal, then so be it. Anyways. Hope you all enjoyed the live stream. It was great to see everybody. Please hit the like button, and we'll look to see you on Monday at the next exploration. And I'll be sure to let you know when we do our next live stream. Everybody take care, and wherever you are in the land. Hey, Adam Baum. Good to see you. Hope all's going well, brother. I hope everybody's doing well, and it was great to see everybody. Take care, and this is Lucius Aurelian signing off.